So I'm glad to be here. CSW is a national policy organization based in Michigan, and care very much about the future of Michigan. A lot of our practice is here, and most of our staff lives here. We do work all over the country, though, and we see what the patterns are. And what I want to talk about today is some of the national patterns and how they apply to Michigan about workforce development. Both of the previous presenters talked about the importance of this issue as part of what they did. And Julie made the point at the outset about blowing up basically what we do now in the federal programs that come into the states for workforce development. Reimagining is a fancy term for the same point, that we're doing work nationally with some of our peers around how to get the conversation changed about how do we even think about public investment in workforce development. Because as Charlie just presented eloquently, we're in a very different economy, and it's continuing to change from the one that a lot of things were built for. I'd like to note that federal workforce policy and programs are pretty out of date. The major ones that operate today were created before something called the internet came into being. They were created before, in the words like global competition, were a normal thing in the conversation. They were created at a point when the assumption was K-12 education and getting a high school diploma was probably enough. And so the programs that are there have very little political support in Washington. They limp from year to year, and we really don't have a consensus over how to deal with some important issues. You saw some great data from Charlie's presentation just now. I just want to pull a couple of points out and underscore them. Charlie, you made the point we're not a poor place, but in the rankings we have comparatively fallen. And we indeed are 36th on the list now. We weren't 36th a few years ago. We were a lot higher on the list of income, and that's directly related, as was Charlie suggested, to educational attainment, which I'll come to in a minute. I want to note the issue of long-term unemployment. One of the biggest horrible issues going on in workforce policy in the country is there's a lot of people who don't find new jobs after they lose their jobs. We're averaging just under roughly 100,000 people who have been unemployed for a year or longer. That is an unprecedented number. It's an unprecedented scale of unemployment. Unemployment was set up with the assumption, and unemployment benefits set up with the assumption, people would be out of work a few months at most between jobs. We've got a whole cohort of people who are out of work longer than anything we've seen since stats have been recorded, which started about 1948, and I think it's fair to say since the Depression. At the same time, every single day when I open one of the news sources, read a newspaper, whatever, in Michigan, as well as around the country, there are stories about industries and employers worried they can't find workers with the skills that they need. It's now hit the papers. I'm looking at, I saw one yesterday in one of the Detroit papers. It's in nearly every day in some way, shape, or form. So we've got gaps. My bottom line and my single message, and I'll get some specific recommendations in a couple of minutes, is that we really need to focus in the state on educational attainment. If we become a leader in educational attainment, if you look at the graph Charlie was showing about the Massachusetts-Michigan comparison, and we really focus on the question of how do we ensure people have greater skills and greater educational attainment across their working life, we're going to be in a much more prosperous economy regardless of what the mix of jobs that come into being are. There have been some really good research done looking at so what kind of educational attainment, the jobs that are emerging and growing in the economy, both replacement and new, are going to require. Tony Carnevale at Georgetown University has done some very good work on this recently. And when he looked at it state by state, the numbers were relatively similar state by state, but Michigan's came out at 62%. Saying that 62%, almost 2/3 of the jobs that you would expect to see here in Michigan in 2018 are going to require a credential beyond a high school diploma. That might be a PhD, it might be an associate's degree, it might be a certificate of some kind that you've gotten through an apprenticeship program or a specialized training program. But that workers who don't have post-secondary attainment of some kind are going to be lagging behind. Charlie showed the chart on income, and the numbers show pretty dramatically. And so the opportunity in the new economy that Julie talked about is really going to be tied to people learn past high school. High school diploma is an essential, but it's not enough. So indeed, and if educational attainment matters, Michigan is not a leader. If saying we need 62% to have some kind of post-secondary credential, what do we have? About a third of our adult workers have an associate's degree or higher, which is probably the best statistics proxy there is. We're below the national average on that. We're improving the percentage, but it's not improving very fast. And I want to note that those percentages are even smaller for people of color. That the percentage is more like a quarter for blacks, 20%, 21% for Hispanics and Native Americans, even lower for Hispanic males, for example. So there are some huge disparities on educational attainment, even within that number. The other thing I want to note on the other end of the continuum, beyond who's got a post-secondary degree, and we're saying that's about a third of the workforce. Another third of the workforce lacks sufficient basic skills to enter a job that requires them to read and write, basically. We did a study on this a couple of years ago for the Council on Labor and Economic Growth. And our conclusion from this, and it tracks with national research around adult basic skills, is that 1.7 million adults in Michigan basically don't have what are called level 1 basic skills. These are very low basic skills. It's like, at the can you read the stop sign and the street names level of basic skills. And they have no chance in the economy if those skills aren't improved. And we have lousy systems for improving them now and almost no investment in it. So we've got a huge cohort of people that don't have the skills they need to even enter the labor force. It all adds up, in my mind, to an imperative that if we focused on one thing in the state and being good at it, focusing on how we change educational attainment would make a massive difference in our economy. When we talk about that, I want to stress that I'm not just talking about who's going to MSU or U of M. I'm really talking about a mix of academic and technical. We have all kinds of technical careers going on and needed, whether they're in healthcare and manufacturing and emerging industries, IT, other things. And there's all kinds of skill credentials that are possible in that. And they're part of the mix too. So as you think about the issue of increasing educational attainment in Michigan, I want to argue basically for sort of 7 guiding principles. That, I'm deliberately not talking about any specific acronyms or programs or institutions that operate things now. I think we need to blow the whole thing up and really rethink it. And this is sort of really trying to say, what should be in something we design in Michigan to do the kind of workforce investment that would get us the educational attainment we need. This has an emphasis in particular on adults because frankly, a huge percentage of the workforce we're going to have in the next decade to 15 years is already post-high school. So in addition to doing the important early childhood work that was mentioned, in addition to strengthening what goes on in K-12, we really need a concerted adult learning strategy, and that's really what I'm trying to focus on here as complement